Okay, Ambisonics unwrapped. Yeah, I think the about me I can skip. In general, I like to create tools which other people can use, especially sound designers, to create 3D audio experiences. Because I'm not a good sound designer, but I like to help where I can, if I try. If you want to learn more about maybe my stuff from atmoky, my freelancing work at Grapes or open source, please visit my website. There you can see my GitHub for all the open source projects and yeah, contact information and all of that. So 7 or 8 years ago, I created the IEM Plug-in Suite. And earlier I said there are more people now, and that's quite nice because we had some students bring plugins to it. And now, as I'm no longer with the IEM, Felix Holzmüller, which is now maintaining the plugins. I try to contribute a little bit over time when I find time, but yeah, it's quite hard. But yeah, so 7 years ago, I created the IEM plugins, and I just learned about Ambisonics and how to do it, and learned about the inner workings. And I heard a couple of statements about Ambisonics, which I then just took for granted because I was new to it. I learned, and I thought, okay, that must be the truth. Now, of course, years pass, and I hopefully got any wiser. I was rethinking some of these statements, and I thought, okay, maybe they are true, or maybe they aren't. And that's what I want to do in that talk, to take a closer look to these 5 or 6 statements I brought today, and see how it relates to the practice of creating Ambisonics, but also look a little bit deeper in the rabbit hole into the theory of Ambisonics, and that's the mathematical description behind it, but also like the implementation in code. But first, of course, I have to give an introduction about Ambisonics. What is Ambisonics? And I will keep it very briefly because I think most of you know, in a nutshell, it's a format where you can represent a 3D audio scene. And Ambisonics brings you tools and methods and algorithms to bring audio sources into the ambisonic representation. That's usually called panning or encoding. I actually prefer panning because encoding is too weird. And then you need a rendering step, a decoding step to bring it to loudspeakers or headphones. And the most important thing you need to know about Ambisonics is you can't listen to that in the middle. You need something to bring it out of that representation again. And for example, the IEM Plug-in Suite provides a couple of plugins for the encoding part. You got effects here and also rendering, but I think that's quite clear. And there, of course, are more plugin suites. There's not just the IEM Plug-in Suite. There's Barter, ICST, and also many paid ones you can buy and get really nice tools. We come to my first statement I want to maybe debunk or not. And then the first statement is you have to talk about spherical harmonics. It's not really a statement you hear. It's more like an observation I made when sitting in like introductions to Ambisonics. The introduction of like the encoding, Ambisonics and decoding step, I think that should be enough. Maybe stretch it out longer, like 5 minutes and not like 5 seconds, which I did. That should be enough to show your like students in the room the tools and do something with it. But I saw that many like turn and go down the rabbit hole and tell everyone what spherical harmonics are. And it doesn't stop there, because then of course you have to show pictures of spherical harmonics. Then you have to say, okay, you can also capture them with ambisonic microphones. Of course you have to show pictures of ambisonic microphones. And although they are named ambisonic microphones, there is no ambisonics coming out of them. It's called A format, so it's another weird thing you talk about. And you have to tell them about transcoding from A to B format, whatever that is. Then, of course, once you're a B format, you can do all the exciting manipulations like warping and all that stuff. Then, of course, decoding is a favorite topic for everyone. You start at the beginning with the sample decoding. Then, of course, you go to more sophisticated methods like RAUM decoding. In RAUM, there is VBAP. So what is VBAP? Yeah, you can do like the triangles and all that stuff. You can also listen to it via binaural decoding. Have the virtual loudspeaker approach, which is now like not used anymore, hopefully, but you use HRTFs and MuggleS. And 2 hours later, you arrive at the point where you tell people to please download Reaper and some plugin suite, and you do something with it. And for like introductions to Ambisonics, I don't think that's a good way to do that. By like a show of hands, who has never heard of Ambisonics here in the room? Okay, 1, 2, okay, that's cool. I just told you, so you are liars, obviously. Who has worked with Ambisonics in the past? Okay, quite a lot. Who has heard of spherical harmonics? Okay, quite a lot. Even one who has never heard of Ambisonics before, really nice, because I told you or you worked with it? You don't have to answer. And who has actually calculated spherical harmonics or used it in code? Okay, 2 people. So thanks for that, because you have just proven my point that you don't need to know of spherical harmonics or use them actually to create like immersive experiences like here. And if you look to other formats like stereo or like Dolby Atmos-like formats, you have also like very interesting, nerdy backends in there. For example, you have different panning functions for stereo. You have VBAP, where you can talk about convex hulls and Delaunay triangulation and matrix inversion to make it way more efficient. But you don't need to. Please give your students the tools and let them play around, because that's the most outcome you can give them, I would say. That's basically all you need. We come to my second statement. First order Ambisonics is enough. I have to be honest here, no one ever said that. But I see it in the limitations software gives you from time to time. We already heard that, for example, Unity or Unreal Engine, it's limited to first order Ambisonics. You will have even problems to load audio files with more than 8 audio channels. And that's a little bit weird, because they do all that 4K and visual stuff, and they give us 4 channels of audio in Ambisonics. So that's kind of bad. For everyone who doesn't know what first order is or higher order, the thing is, you have first order Ambisonics and you can increase it to higher order, and you will increase the number of channels, but also the spatial resolution of it. So first order Ambisonics has 4 channels. That's why you mostly see, or very often see, 4 capsules on ambisonic microphones, but it's not the same. It's not the same 4 channels. And it's a really bad reproduction for loudspeaker playback, because if you pan a source into that direction in first order Ambisonics, basically that full set of loudspeakers would play that sound. That's really bad. And also for HRTFs, it's not a good resolution to get very good reproduction out of it. On the other side, we have higher order Ambisonics. For example, for third order Ambisonics, we need 16 audio channels. We go up to like 5th order with 64 channels, and it goes higher and higher from there. So you need more memory and stuff to get a really good reproduction. And you have that bad platform support I was talking of. So Unity doesn't have it. Unreal Engine middleware like Fmod lacks Ambisonic support. You can get around it a little bit, but it's always hacky solutions. And like platforms like YouTube or Facebook, they were limited to, I think, 2nd order Ambisonics. But hopefully with the Eclipse format, which was introduced lately, we will maybe get a better audio resolution. Keep in mind, with great order comes great CPU and memory requirements, so that might be a reason why the game engines don't want to give the audio designers more memory. But that's not a reason to like get rid of your first order Ambisonics microphones. There's still very cool stuff you can do with it. For example, measure impulse responses and use modern methods like the recently released paper on Ambisonic spatial decomposition method with salient and diffuse separation by Lukas Gölles and Matthias Frank to upmix them into a higher order Ambisonics format. And the good thing about it is you don't get the upmixing artifacts you get from signals because you're working on impulse responses. So that's worth checking out. Now we come out to actually the first real statement I heard, and I want to discuss with you. There's no depth in Ambisonics, and I think that's a quite hard statement to analyze, because I actually heard that in that as it stands there, but it's hard to grasp what's really meant with it. So let's take a look at the theory of Ambisonics for when it comes to first order Ambisonics. So we have our WXYZ channel. That's like the 4 channels of first order Ambisonics. We have our signal with the uppercase S, and we have direction information like elevation and azimuth. So there's no distance in that equation. And when we take a look at how microphones would work in Ambisonics, they all assume like plane waves. So basically sound sources infinity far away, so that the sound waves will reach the microphone as like a plane wave instead of a spherical wave. So also no distance information. So I would say it's true, there's no depth in Ambisonics. But that's only the theoretical part of it. If you looked at the practice, of course you have tools, for example, like the RAUM encoder I have to show here, to create a sense of depth and distance with the like direct and reverberant ratio you can have. But also if you record something with like a full spherical microphone, you also capture the room and the depth. So I would argue from a practice perspective, there is depth in Ambisonics, because otherwise, if there isn't, is there any in stereo? Would someone say stereo has no depth? Like the music created in the last, I don't know, forever has no depth? I wouldn't say that. But I'm happy to discuss this if everyone has like a different view on that statement, because I think people don't talk on the same subject here when it's about depth, because it can be technical, it can be like perceptive and all that. So we come to statement number 4. Use max RE all the time. I was long thinking about how to explain what max RE is, and I figured I must do a visualization, an interactive one. You usually should see like a full circle around that, but the contrast setting doesn't allow that. That's a ambisonic beam. If you pan a source into like the front direction depicted here, you get that, and it's a third order beam, I have to say. You get that main lobe where you want to radiate all the energy, which you desire, but you also get like side lobes, and they are like in different direction and even the opposite direction. And what you have in the middle, that light line, that's the energy vector. And you get that vector by taking all the directions around your beam, scale it with the energy radiated in that direction, and you sum them all up. And the resulting vector is that light vector. And that's the energy vector, or R uppercase E. And it turns out the energy vector is a very good predictor for the direction where we perceive sound from. So it looks good, it's the correct direction. And the length of that vector gives you how pronounced that source is in that direction. So for example, if we lower now the order of Ambisonics to first order, we see the beam gets wider and wider, and the length of the vector is getting smaller, because now the source width we would perceive is bigger. That's why the vector becomes shorter. And if you go the other direction, so crank it up to like 7th order Ambisonics, we see we are almost at the peak. But of course, like Uncle Ben said, the greater the order, the more memory use. So it's not maybe the optimal solution to do that. But what you can also do is to use special weighting of the Ambisonic orders. That's how do you weight them dependent on each other. So there is something which is called max RE, and you see in a second why it's called max RE. So if you apply that like bit by bit, I hope you can see it, you get 2 things happening. One is the beam gets a little bit wider, your main lobe, but also the side lobes get smaller and smaller in energy. So that's basically quite nice to have not project energy into a different direction. And you can overdo that to get to a weighting called in phase. Then the side lobes go away completely. There's no side lobe, but you see there's a way bigger main lobe. And you see when I go from max RE to in phase, also the energy vector gets smaller. So that's also bad. And that is why that setting here is called max RE, because then the energy vector is the maximum. So to combine all of that is like max RE sounds like a really good thing to do, right? I thought so as well. That is why I made it the default setting for the IRAD decoder. That's a tool you can use to design a renderer for Ambisonics to any layout like we have here. And I set the setting to max RE. So I'm quite positive, like 99% of people use it with set setting. And it's fine for like a location we have here. But I noticed when I listened to it in the production studio at IEM, that's a smaller studio with, I think, 13 loudspeakers, maybe a quarter of that room, then disabling max RE, it actually sounds way better. You get a finer localization and a better frequency response because less loudspeakers are playing the same signal at the same time. So you suddenly get more high frequency content to your listening position. So I'm not sure if use max RE all the time is a very good setting. I could argue for smaller venues you should turn it off, but it always comes to your listening experience and you should test that. Because I have an example where it's actually bad to use no weights, or it's even bad to use max RE settings. A couple of years ago I went to Berlin and listened to Ambisonics in the planetarium. And you have to imagine that's a really, really big venue. Loudspeakers far, far apart. Of course, you have way more loudspeakers, but it's really, one side to the next is really far, far away. And well, as long as you stand in the sweet spot, it's no problem because you will hear the most energy from the desired direction. But in the center of the room, there's the big projection unit. So as an audience, you can't be there. So you have to be somewhere else. And you can see that side lobe, which is max RE, it still radiates energy to that loudspeaker. So if you're near that loudspeaker, you will hear that first, although it's like, let's say, minus 40 dB playing. So you will hear the direction from that loudspeaker, which isn't intended in the piece played back. And you get a second problem because that loudspeaker also plays a sound, but it's so far away that you hear it delayed. So you hear the wrong direction and then the correct direction later. So that's really bad. And what we've noticed here in phase is way better. You get the problem of the bigger side lobe, bigger main lobe, but you don't have these effects that a wrong loudspeaker plays sound. So it depends on the venue, and if you change that setting, you should definitely go around in the room and listen to it. And if the venue is maybe too big, I would even say use VBAP or another format, because Ambisonics might not be the best format for that venue. Now my actually two last statements, and this is my pet peeve. This is something which triggers me every time I hear it, and it's actually the reason why I am here today, because I want to bring it to an end. It should stop. I don't want to get triggered anymore. The one is Ambisonic rotation is efficient. It was actually the first thing I heard of Ambisonics. Use Ambisonic because the rotation is so efficient, whatever that means. And it is lossless, and we will take a look at both right now. But first, what is ambisonic rotation? For what would you need it or use it? So with ambisonic rotation, you can rotate that sound field fairly easy. And one application for that, for example, would be if SIMD would say, hey, the audience should face that wall, we have a problem because then the audio isn't aligned anymore. But it would be just a matter of seconds. I put in the scene rotator, turn it like 90 degrees, and everything is all right again. So if you want to adapt your piece to the scene, which maybe has wrong coordinates or a different coordinate system, you can use that. And what we've also heard today, it's also very common to be used with head tracking. So for binaural playback, when you have headphones on and you listen, for example, to source directly in front of you, what would happen if you turn your head, you take it with you and it's still in front of you. But what you can do with head tracking information, I will play that simultaneously, you can counter-rotate that source by just the rotation you did, and then it stays anchored to the scene, and that's a more natural listening, right? Because here the sound sources are also in the room, and when we turn our head, it's anchored to the real world and not the virtual world we have in our headphones. So you can use that's one of my open source projects, a head tracking device, and send that to a rotation and have that head tracked audio. If you've never experienced that, ask someone with a head tracker. It's definitely worth it. And it must not be Ambisonics, anything head tracked, it's just way cooler. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Ambisonic rotations. Is it really efficient or is it not? That's a usual audio chain you have. You have a couple of sources here on the left. Each source has a direction. Each source gets fed into a panner, then panned into Ambisonics and summed up. And then there's the rotation unit we have there, and it rotates the sound field, so it's now called Ambisonics asterisk. That's our rotated sound field. And then you can go to the rendering. But how does a rotation really look like? What's that from a mathematical perspective? It looks quite easy and innocent. It's a rotation matrix. Here it's third order Ambisonics. It's 16 by 16 elements in that matrix, but you see a lot of them are like 0. So we have like sub matrices. There's a 3 by 3, 5 by 5, 7 by 7, and it goes on and on to a higher order Ambisonics. And what you do is a simple matrix multiplication. You have your Ambisonic sample, maybe 16 channels, and you do a matrix multiplication to get your rotated field. And for each sample, you need 83 multiplications and 68 additions, if I counted correctly. Not sure about that. Let's take a look how you would get these rotation matrices. So for the 3 by 3, it's quite easy. That's a regular rotation matrix you have in geometry. You have your yaw, pitch, and roll rotations. You combine them to a single matrix. And out of that, you can apply, for example, a vector here in space, like x by z, and rotate it around the origin. That's what we have here. And in that case, we would have 9 multiplications and 6 additions. And the other matrices, the bigger ones, you would get with code like that. You don't need to read it. It's from the IEM plugins. I just want to show you that it doesn't come for free. You have to do additional work to get these 5 by 5 matrices, 7 by 7, and so on. So is that really efficient? Because we have a lot of stuff to calculate, and also the computations for each sample seems quite large. So is it efficient or is it not? And it's hard to give a yes or no to it, because efficient compared to what? Is there an alternative to that? Because if you want to rotate Ambisonics, well, yeah, rotate Ambisonics. There's no other option, right? Well, we could try to understand that the question if it's efficient if we take a look at that audio graph we have here, because we could do something different. I told you about that 3 by 3 matrix where you can rotate vectors, like directions. So why not move all that rotation at the beginning? So instead of one rotation for Ambisonics, we have one rotation for each audio sample, for each audio source, and just rotate their directions and bring them to Ambisonics. And we also have our Ambisonics asterisk, our rotated sound field. Okay? Is that maybe a more efficient way to rotate Ambisonics? To actually not rotate Ambisonics, but rotate everything before. And to give an answer to that, you would have to create a benchmark and take a look at the results. And that is exactly what I did. I published it here. If you want, you can grab the link. I can also send it out later. It's in the interweb, you say. Let's take a look at that graph, okay? Can you see it right? Is it? Maybe I can get rid of the tab. Do some scrolling. Okay, so, oh, it's very small, I'm sorry. On the x-axis, you got different ambisonic orders, starting from 1 going to 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the y-axis, you get the amount of time spent rendering 10 seconds of audio. And we have currently selected 8 audio sources. So we now render 8 audio sources, 2 ambisonics, and 10 seconds of audio. And it takes for first order 1.9 milliseconds. And we compare it like the ambisonic rotation, the time it needs if we do the first audio graph you see, and we compare it to the second audio graph where we rotate the sources individually. And you see, okay, for 8 sources, ambisonic rotation isn't really efficient, right? Because the source rotation takes less time to compute. But what happens if we crank up the number of sources? It must turn around, right? There must be a way that ambisonic rotation is efficient. And we can see that if we reach 128 sources. And if I get rid of the logarithmic scale, it's more and more pronounced, of course, if we have a linear way of things. So now, in every case, for every order, when we render 128 audio sources, the individual rotation is worse. So ambisonic rotation is efficient, I guess. But you already saw that switch I got over there, right? So that's true if the sources don't move at all. If we simulate now that each source moves all the time, which you usually would have, I think, in dynamic or interesting pieces, then it gets worse because the first graph has to do way more work again because it has to re-evaluate spherical harmonics in each render step and do a crossfading and all that stuff. So then it appears that ambisonic rotation is actually not efficient. Okay, yay, we can put an end to that. It's not efficient, just don't say it. Well, but is that really a good workflow? Because, for example, head tracking, you have one head tracking device and you send the information to one rotation. Here you would have to send it to maybe 128 sources. And there's no infrastructure for that, right? And even though if it were, you don't want to test and check if really every instance of your penna has that rotation information available. So I would say it's neither wrong nor right because the statement doesn't make sense at all because there is no alternative to that. It's just there. And I think that should be the main argument. Ambisonic rotation is possible. And when we take a look to the second part of the question, it's lossless. I can give you good news because it actually is. So we have a rotation of a sound field around us, which can be inversed again to bring it back to its original state. At least in theory. So we saw that rotation matrix and we want to invert the rotation matrix. It's a nice property that we can invert the smaller matrices. That works for a 3x3 matrix. And as we derive the higher order matrices from the 3x3 one, it's no problem. So in theory, we can do it. But there are maybe lazy implementers. One of them is maybe me. And I try to be very efficient in what I do, optimize my code and do steps I was sure nobody would hear. So what I now want to show and the point I want to bring is it also applies for encoding. That's why you see an encoder here, another rotation. And the energy visualizer, which shows you the energy projected into a direction. So here in the stereo encoder, we have a source panned to the left, and I will very quickly pan it to the right and the left again. And what you will see is that's not moving, it's just disappearing and occurring or appearing on the other side again. And what happens under the hood is you have one direction, and what you actually want is panning it to the other direction. But what actually happens under the hood is this direction goes away and this one comes. It's just a blending between directions. At least that's how I implemented it in my penna. And I'm I'm very sure that every other penna would do the same. So we can watch this video, which takes ages to start, actually. There should be a mouse coming in, yeah. And you see, it's disappearing and appearing again, and it's like that movement. And for small buffer sizes, you wouldn't hear that. I had like 4,096 samples in block size. And that's a very intense movement, right? From completely left to completely right. So in a practical application, you wouldn't have that because you have source movement. And then you have a blend from here to here, and you wouldn't hear a difference. But years ago, and that's why I stopped the video, because it would reveal that, I added a hidden parameter to the stereo encoder. You can access it when you disable the UI, and there is a parameter which is called sample-wise panning, because I wanted to test, is it a difference? And I enabled it here, and now it goes. And what you see now is you see a movement from left to right. So if you're interested, you can use the stereo encoder, access that parameter, and just play around and listen to it in different settings, in different speeds of movements, if you can hear a difference. And as I said, the same applies to the rotation matrix, because we don't do rotation for each sample. We don't update that rotation matrix sample by sample. We just update the matrix where you want to be, like in the next 128 seconds, and do a crossfade from the one view to the next view. And for like regular rotations, there shouldn't be a difference. So that's actually the end of my talk. Just to give a quick summary. Do you have to talk about spherical harmonics? I don't think so. You can, because it's a fun thing to do, but maybe in a more advanced course about Ambisonics and not an entry one. First order Ambisonics is enough. No, we want more. If you guys get 4K, we want to have more than 4 channels of audio. There's no depth in Ambisonics. Well, what is depth? I would say yes, from a mathematical standpoint, not really, but who cares actually, right? Use max array all the time. Please, if you have like a loudspeaker system, play around with that setting and test it out if you maybe can have like a better experience with max array turned off. Unfortunately, yesterday I hadn't have enough time to test it here, but it would be quite interesting to pan a single source around and switch between max array weighting, none, or even in phase to just get a sensation what happens with that. Ambisonic rotation is efficient? No, but who cares, because it's the only tool we have to rotate the sound field, right? But it is lossless, and even with these shortcuts I took in the implementation, you wouldn't hear a difference. And that makes Ambisonics great, because no other format can be rotated that easily. For example, a 714, if you rotate it, you would have a way bigger or more blurry representation of that. And if you rotate it again, the next thing happens, and it gets wider and more blurry. In Ambisonics, it doesn't do that actually, so that's quite nice. And I actually wanted to name this talk like provocative, why not to use Ambisonics, but I experienced by doing the research, it's still a very nice format to play around with, and it's very versatile. So sorry I couldn't be that provocative right now. But yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for hearing my rants and giving me an opportunity to vent. And I'm open for questions or even more statements or discussions about these points. So thanks.